Let's talk, go a little bit personal here. As somebody that did work for the national parks for as long as you did, environmental protection has got to be part of your core, let alone part of your platform. You've made environmental protection a key part of your platform here, and in Colorado, that means everything. What bold steps would you take to protect the environment and make sure that working people aren't left behind during that process?
Well, um, there's been no significant environmental legislation, in my estimation, in 40 to 50 years. So we are operating under environmental laws that are 40 to 50 years old, even a bit older, I think, if I think about it a little bit harder. And that is not consistent with the state of the environment today. So much of the environmental destruction in terms, and we're talking about, sort of on a broad scale, you know, um, arable soil, drinkable water, those kinds of metrics. That the decline, biodiversity, that the decline has really been in my lifetime, my adult lifetime, in the last 40 years or so. So we have, in recent decades, presided over this ecological, and I think collapse is the right word. And we are not talking about that in this society at all. We're pretending that it's not happening. And we're pretending that there's going to be technological fixes to all of these problems. But if technology is able to deal with some of these problems, it's not going to be a very happy world to live in. And one of those technological fixes is something like robo-bees to deal with the decline in pollinators. You want to live in a world of robo-bees, don't you?
No, I mean, we've seen what happens to them in the Hunger
Pollinators.
Games, okay? So,
Well, that's what they'll serve up to us. And we don't notice things like the depletion of fish in the oceans because we have farmed fish now, right? Genetically modified farmed fish. And so that's the natural, quote unquote, natural world that they're going to serve up for us, is a very fake and artificial version that, let's face it, is not likely to be very good for us. And at the end of the day, is going to deplete biodiversity even more. But we're not talking about it. And that's because corporations don't want us to talk about it. We're supposed to pretend that it's not happening. And so I think job one is to get very serious about the ecological conditions that we face globally. Climate change is a symptom of that, but the root cause is our relationship with the natural world and viewing it as a limitless resource. And it's not. It's just not a limitless resource. And can you engineer the heck out of stuff and throw in a bunch of technological inputs and, stretch things a bit more like fracking? Sure, you can do that, but you're still going to have a substantial ecological cost. And at the end of the day, if we spend all of our time immersed in technology, we stop caring about the natural world. But at the end of the day, we still need the natural world for survival. So updating the environmental laws, being serious about the ecological conditions that face us. And then I would stand against measures that attempt to manage the natural world to serve human ends, because again, I think that goes badly. And I'll just say a little example of this. So when they developed Glen Canyon, well, it's getting late in the day here.
it's
Um,
okay, yeah.
the reservoir, Glen Canyon Reservoir. Why can't I think of the name of that? But when they did that, they dammed the Colorado River and created the reservoir. Okay. So this doesn't seem like the end of the world because, you're just controlling the river and you're creating this recreation spot. And isn't that a good thing? And yeah, flood control is a good thing and water for irrigation is a good thing and so on and so forth. But what we don't understand is that that river was integral to the creation of Grand Canyon. And once you dam that river, the natural processes that created the Grand Canyon are altered. Secondly, when you dam a river, you kill it as a biological entity, because all that goes into creating a river isn't just water in a riverbed. It's all of the biological processes that are part of that. So, so Congress recognizes this in the early 1990s and creates a law to try to encourage the federal government to figure out how to kind of put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And we're now 30 years in and they still don't have a clue how to do it. So when we mess with ecosystems in the name of management, we don't have a clue really how to do that. And I'll give one more example, again, by my opponent, John Hickenlooper. He supports a bipartisan measure called Fix Our Forests Act. And from everything that I can gather, it's a logging bill. It is a logging bill. We're going to manage the forest to reduce wildfire risk. But Earth Justice came out and said it is an old growth logging measure that would open up, I can't remember the number offhand, but many thousands of acres to new logging, and is exactly, contrary to what we actually need. Healthy forests are more resilient to wildfire than forests that have been managed, right? But management sounds like you're doing something and it doesn't upset the logging companies. So win-win if that's where your head's at, right? So
I
what do you
mean, and
say?
again, right? I think there's a lot of bills that pass off as climate change purposes that also fold into ruining our climate at the same time. And I think that's very
Right.
important. But how do you make justice accessible and actionable for rural communities too, such as where they're logging these places?
Well, when I think about climate justice, what I think about is, because I think that's, I don't know how well defined that is, just sort of in general parlance, but I think about communities that are on the front end of or the receiving end of effects associated with climate change. And that can be communities affected by wildfire, it can be communities affected by drought or extreme weather events. And I think that the time scale for climate change is such that any immediate measure today is not going to affect that trajectory. So if we're on a warming trajectory, if we could flip a switch to renewable energy today, that trajectory is going to persist, at least for some point into the future, because the carbon emissions are stored in the atmosphere, and that's what's driving the warming. So even if we got the emissions down to zero, that warming is going to continue. So I think that we need to really be thinking about mitigation measures for communities that are in that situation. Like, how can we adaptation and mitigation? How can we make those communities more resilient to the changes that are going to happen? Sea level rise, more extreme weather events, et cetera. And we need to be budgeting for that, and we need to be building infrastructure that can resist that. And I think that. Well, let me just think for here a second. I I don't mean to sound pessimistic on this issue because I don't know that I am pessimistic, but I think that there is a certain simplistic idea about how to deal with climate change that has kind of taken hold in the Democratic Party and maybe the culture at large. And I think that, let me just say one thing about that. For example, renewable energy is not exclusively renewable in this respect, that it takes a fair amount of petroleum inputs to actually produce it. And as you alluded to, it takes a significant amount of ecological destruction. And so one example of that right now is a place called Thacker Pass that is sacred to Native peoples there. And it is a lithium mine, an enormous lithium mine that Trump gave the green light to, and Biden did as well, without the usual environmental reviews. And we need it to power, right, our renewable lifestyles. But once that lithium's gone, that lithium's gone, and the mining devastation that's associated with it will still be there. And it takes petroleum fueled equipment to tear up that terrain and get the lithium out, and then more petroleum to process it into some use, right? And so we just need to be honest about that. We need to not pretend that, oh, there's some magical source of clean energy out there like fairy dust that is just going to make all this go away.
Sometimes they wish there was, for sure.
Yes, I wish that more than anything, but there's not. That doesn't mean that renewable energy doesn't have a place. It does, but it's not the be all end all solution that we would like it to be, in my estimation, as somebody who's been studying these issues for literally decades.